And for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 17th, 2025 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: the U.S. unemployment rate rose to 4.6% in November, its highest in more than 4 years, fueling questions about the underlying strength of the economy. Trump was set to interview Christopher Waller, a Fed governor, as another candidate to lead the central bank. Warner Brothers Discovery is preparing to tell its shareholders to reject Paramount's latest offer as soon as Wednesday and plans to recommend they support its deal with Netflix instead. Major U.S. stocks indexes ended mixed, with the S&P 500 and Dow retreating 0.2% and 0.6% respectively, and the Nasdaq rising 0.2%. Kraft Heinz said Steve Cahillane will become its chief executive on January 1st, succeeding Carlos Abrams Rivera, in a shakeup that comes months after the company said it would split in two. Blackstone is leading a $400 million investment in data security firm Sierra that values the New York-based company at $9 billion. PepsiCo sought to push up prices of soda and other goods at retailers to help Walmart, regulators alleged in a lawsuit that the Trump administration dismissed. Tesla was given 90 days to change its ad policies after California found it deceived consumers with claims about its self-driving tech. British streaming company DAZN is in advanced talks to acquire a majority stake in the regional U.S. sports broadcaster Main Street Sports. The slide in CoreWeave share price highlighted investors' concerns about a possible bubble in artificial intelligence. Venmo owner PayPal applied to Utah authorities and the FDIC to form a bank offering business loans and savings accounts. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Trump's push to loosen Beijing's influence in the Panama Canal was set back by a demand from China that its largest shipping company get a controlling stake in a deal to sell dozens of ports to a group led by BlackRock. Senate GOP leader Thune said Congress won't be able to extend health insurance subsidies before leaving for the holidays, ending hopes for a last-minute deal and punting any possible fix into 2026. Trump ordered a blockade on sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela in an escalation of the U.S. pressure campaign on Maduro. Nick Reiner was charged with first-degree murder in the killing of his parents, Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles gave candid assessments of Trump's top aides and the president's operating style in interviews for Vanity Fair. Police released new videos of the suspected gunman responsible for Saturday's shooting at Brown University as the manhunt entered its fourth day. The Pentagon won't release the full, unedited video of a lethal September 2nd boat strike, Hegseth said, despite bipartisan calls to do so. The Trump administration expanded its travel ban to cover 5 additional countries and imposed new partial bans on 15 others. Trump was frustrated by an Israeli operation to kill a top Hamas commander without giving the U.S. prior notice, fearing it could disrupt a fragile ceasefire in Gaza. Died Joe Eli, 78, influential singer-songwriter. The picture on today's front page shows a man and a woman holding hands as they are grieving. And the caption reads, "Heartbreak. The parents of 10-year-old Matilda Britt Van, one of the 15 people killed in a shooting that targeted a Hanukkah celebration Sunday, mourn at a vigil for the victims in Sydney on Tuesday. The attack has shaken up a tight-knit community." The headline, "Australians Pay Tearful Tribute to Jewish Victims." The article, "Attack Leaves Australia's Jews Shaken." Some say warning signs were ignored as the tight-knit community mourns, by Mike Cherney. Sydney. In September 2024, more than 1,400 people filled the streets in Sydney's Bondi Beach neighborhood to celebrate the opening of a new synagogue and community center. It was a different scene on Tuesday, days after 2 gunmen killed 15 people and injured more than 36 people at a nearby Hanukkah festival, including 2 rabbis affiliated with the Shabab of Bondi Center. Flowers lined the front gate. The street was desolate, aside from the presence of police officers and community security guards. Occasionally, a concerned community member dropped off supplies. "It's horrific," said 42-year-old Servi Lazarus, who prays at the center and was at the Hanukkah festival when the shooting unfolded. "There are no words to describe the events and the pain that a lot of people are going through." The attack by a father and son, who, Australian authorities said, were motivated by Islamic State ideology, has badly shaken Sydney's small and tight-knit Jewish community. As many mourned their loved ones and cared for the injured, some expressed frustration that the authorities hadn't heeded warnings about a rise in anti-Semitism since the Gaza war began, particularly in a country many had viewed as a model of multiculturalism. Shabbat of Bondi, the local branch of Shabab, a global Jewish organization, helped organize the Hanukkah event and was particularly hard hit by the attack. Rabbi Eli Schlanger, an assistant rabbi at the center who was known as the Bondi Rabbi, was killed, along with Rabbi Yaakov Levitin, a husband and father who served as general manager, according to Shabab. Robbie Schlanger, 41, was a community chaplain in hospitals and prisons and is survived by his wife and 5 young children, including a 2-month-old baby. On social media, he described his joy in counseling a Jewish inmate who was released in early December, noting that one condition of the release was continuing study and spiritual guidance. Today, Australia is home to about 117,000 Jews, with about 44,000 in Sydney. Many Jews in Sydney are around Bondi Beach, where the community is a mix of religious and secular Jews. Unemployment rises despite job gains. The report isn't expected to alter the Fed's calculus on cutting rates. Rate of 4.6%, highest in over 4 years, hints at underlying economic weakness. By Chow Deng, Harriet Torrey, and Justin Lahart. The U.S. unemployment rate rose to 4.6% in November, its highest in more than 4 years, fueling questions about the economy's underlying strength. A delayed government report on Tuesday showed that 64,000 jobs were gained in November, while 105,000 jobs were lost in October. Job losses in June, August, and October mean the U.S. economy has shed jobs in 3 out of the past 6 months. The unemployment rate in November was up from 4.4% in September, the last month the Labor Department reported for that metric. Taken together, the data point to one of the weakest American labor markets in years. While the economy has added jobs so far this year, mostly on the back of gains in healthcare and education, the shock of shifting trade policies and an immigration crackdown has restrained labor demand and supply, making for tepid hiring overall. All roads lead back to policy out of Washington, D.C., said Joseph Brusuelas, chief economist at the accounting firm RSM. I'm not saying this is a harbinger of a recession, but we have some real challenges to the economy that we didn't have 1 year ago. Still, market reaction was muted Tuesday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 302 points, or 0.6%, and the S&P 500 declined 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite rose 0.2%. Some economists and investors were putting less stock in the new job numbers because of likely distortions from the long government closure, which prevented the Labor Department from collecting some of the data that it normally would have. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. CEOs are learning to make the most of Trump's turn to state capitalism. Some have figured out how to take advantage of the expanded government presence. By Greg Ip. Last week, NVIDIA finally got permission to sell one of its most advanced semiconductor chips to China. The catch? The federal government will take 25% of the revenue from those sales. The NVIDIA deal says something important about the relationship between business and government under President Trump. His regular intrusions into the boardroom, taking equity stakes, revenue slices, or a golden share, prodding companies to lower prices or sell drugs through a federal website are a sort of state capitalism in which the state doesn't necessarily own companies, but uses its substantial leverage to steer their behavior. State capitalism is a two-way street. Many businesses, by aligning themselves with Trump's agenda, elicit better treatment in their ability to sell to China, the tariffs they pay, and how they are regulated, and what mergers are allowed. In other words, state capitalism doesn't just serve the interests of the state, but of favored capitalists. NVIDIA is, in effect, paying for a license that used to be free, but it hasn't objected. After all, it's getting access to a lucrative market that would otherwise be off limits. In August, shortly after Trump first proposed a 15% cut, Chief Executive Jensen Huang told an interviewer, "Whatever it takes to get it approved for us to be able to sell in China is fine with us." State capitalism is neither socialism, in which the government owns the means of production, or laissez-faire capitalism. It's more of a hybrid, variants of which have long been commonplace outside the U.S. Once popular in Japan and Western Europe, it remains prominent in China, Russia, and other countries to varying degrees. In the U.S., taking stakes in companies or commandeering their production was once limited to wars or emergencies, such as the financial crisis and COVID. Trump has made it standard practice. "I think we should take stakes in companies," Trump told the Wall Street Journal last week. Now, some people would say that doesn't sound very American. Actually, I think it is very American. Privately, many business leaders recoil from Trump's intrusions, just as they deplore his attacks on the Federal Reserve and on law firms and media companies that cross him. Publicly, they are mostly silent or even supportive. The reasons are complex. Fear is one reason. Solidarity with the president's broader agenda is another. After former President Joe Biden's regulatory and enforcement onslaught, many are thrilled with Trump's business-friendly appointments. He is rolling back business regulations and oversight, waving through more mergers, and signing business tax cuts into law. Most would prefer a government that is both light touch and arm's length. With Trump, that's not really an option, so many seek to work with him and his inner circle closely on their most important goals. CoreWeave struggles highlight fears of AI bubble by Robbie Wayland. CoreWeave, the largest of a new breed of companies driving the artificial intelligence boom, has watched more than $34 billion of value vaporize in 6 weeks. The share price plunge of 48% comes as investors worry about a possible AI bubble, the fallout from a failed merger, and public criticism from high-profile short seller Jim Chanos, known for predicting the collapse of Enron. But some of the high-tech companies' biggest problems began with a very low-tech nuisance: unexpectedly turbulent rainstorms in North Texas. Over the summer, heavy rains and winds caused a roughly 60-day delay at a construction site in Denton, a small city north of Dallas, preventing contractors from pouring concrete for a major AI data center complex, according to people familiar with the matter. As a result, the completion date for the huge data center cluster, consisting of about 260 megawatts of computing power that CoreWeave plans to lease to OpenAI, has been pushed back several months. There were additional delays caused by revisions to design plans for some of the data centers a partner is building for CoreWeave in Texas and elsewhere, according to filings. The slowdown was compounded by mixed messaging from CoreWeave's Chief Executive Officer, Michael Intrater, which spooked investors and accelerated the company's share price decline at a particularly vulnerable moment for the AI trade. CoreWeave's business model involves using high-interest debt to buy thousands of advanced AI chips from NVIDIA, installing them in server racks inside data centers that it leases from third-party landlords, then renting access to the chips to AI companies. Some critics point to the high levels of debt it has taken on to finance its data center build-out, while others worry that the company depends on just a handful of large customers, such as OpenAI and Meta, for the bulk of its revenue. CoreWeave's gyrations highlight an issue that affects the entire AI industry. The rapid pace of growth has raised questions about how and when major capital investments are going to produce healthy profits. China's terms threaten deal for Panama ports by Costas Paris. President Trump's push to loosen China's influence in the Panama Canal has hit a wall now that Beijing is demanding that China's largest shipping company get a controlling stake in a deal to sell dozens of ports to a BlackRock-led group. The proposed sale includes 2 ports at the Panama Canal and more than 40 others around the world, all controlled by Hong Kong-based C.K. Hutchison. BlackRock and container ship operator Mediterranean Shipping reached a $22.8 billion agreement in March to buy them after Trump raised security concerns about Hutchison's and the port's connection to China. That deal angered Beijing, and after initially pushing for China's COSCO to be brought in as an equal partner, it has now upped its demands, people familiar with the talks said. China is threatening to block the deal unless COSCO gets a majority stake, they say. BlackRock and MSC had been open to offering COSCO an equal stake, but the demand for majority control and veto rights in running the ports is unacceptable, those people say. The White House signaled on Monday that it, too, wouldn't accept such conditions. The president has made clear that Chinese control of the Panama Canal is unacceptable, violates the U.S.-Panama Treaty, and jeopardizes our national and economic security, a White House official said. The deal now is at an intractable impasse, people involved in the talks say. A senior Chinese official said Beijing aims to make control of the ports a negotiating point in the U.S. and China's broader talks over trade and tariffs. Meanwhile, Hutchison continues to own and operate the Panama ports. The Trump administration had originally threatened to take control of the canal, saying China had too much influence because Hutchinson is a Hong Kong-based company, and that could threaten U.S. access to the waterway. Trump orders blockade, aims at Maduro. Move targets all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. By Vera Bergengruen, Kajal Vyas, and Costas Paris. President Trump on Tuesday ordered a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela in a major escalation of his pressure campaign against the country's leader, Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America, Trump posted on Truth Social, referring to U.S. warships, planes, and thousands of troops deployed to the region. He threatened that the U.S. military presence would only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, unless Maduro's regime returned oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us, an apparent reference to Venezuela's nationalization of U.S.-linked holdings in the country. In recent weeks, Trump has threatened to carry out land strikes in Venezuela. It was unclear how many tankers would be affected and to what extent the U.S. military would be involved in implementing such a blockade. The White House didn't respond to a request for comment. 5 nations added to travel ban by Michelle Hackman. Washington. The Trump administration expanded its travel ban to cover 5 additional countries and added partial bans on 15 additional countries in a move to formalize President Trump's promised crackdown on third world countries. Citizens of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, South Sudan, and Syria are joining the list of countries whose citizens are nearly all banned from immigrating to or entering the U.S., according to a White House announcement. Palestinians, whose documents are issued by the Palestinian Authority, are also now banned. Laos and Sierra Leone, which were previously subject to partial bans, will now face full restrictions. In addition, 15 countries will face new partial bans: Angola, Antigua and Barbuda, Benin, Ivory Coast, Dominica, Gabon, the Gambia, Malawi, Mauritania, Nigeria, Senegal, Tanzania, Tonga, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Citizens from these countries generally won't be able to apply for tourist or student visas while the ban is in effect. In total, 39 countries, plus Palestinian nationals, are now subject to full or partial travel bans. Hamas leaders killing by Israel angers U.S. Trump complained Netanyahu was derailing my deal. By Anat Peled and Alexander Ward. President Trump was frustrated at an Israeli operation to kill a top Hamas commander without giving the U.S. prior notice, fearing it could disrupt a fragile ceasefire in Gaza that he considers one of his major achievements, said U.S. officials and a person familiar with the matter. His complaints about the December 13th killing were conveyed by the White House to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the official said. Trump separately has told aides that Netanyahu was derailing my deal to stop the fighting and rebuild the shattered enclave, said a U.S. official. Netanyahu's office said Israel was forced to strike because Hamas has shown no signs of disarming, which a future phase of the plan requires, according to U.S. officials and a person familiar with the matter. Trump's message, which was earlier reported by Axios, highlighted Washington's growing frustration with Israel over its continued airstrikes and other military moves in Gaza, which have slowed dealing with other terms of the truce, including creating an alternative to Hamas to govern the Strip and permanently ending the war. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Europe wakes itself up on defense. Some European leaders finally see the dangers clearly, but do voters? It's a season of peace and goodwill, unless you're a European defense official. In that case, you've probably spent the past couple of weeks warning about impending war with Russia. Europe finally is waking itself up to the dangerous new world. We must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents or great-grandparents endured, Mark Rutte warned over the weekend. The opponent would be Russia. The Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization told an audience in Berlin, as he said Europe must spend more on defense. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said over the weekend that Mr. Putin harbors expansionist ambitions akin to the Nazis after absorbing the Sudeten land in 1938. Richard Knighton, Britain's most senior military officer, warned on Monday that the British must be prepared to fight for their country in case of a Russian attack. Similar alarums are becoming common across the continent. A fair question is, what took so long? Vladimir Putin's designs have been known at least since his tirade against NATO at the 2007 Munich conference. Mr. Putin has sent his spies to kill his enemies on NATO soil, notably the 2006 assassination of Alexander Litvinenko and the 2018 nerve agent plot in the UK. His initial invasion of Ukraine in 2014 should have set off alarms, but Barack Obama and Angela Merkel tried appeasement instead. As the Ukraine war drags on, Russia is also growing bolder about testing NATO with drone incursions and an alleged attack on a Polish rail line. Mr. Putin's ambitions to reconstitute a Russian empire haven't changed, but Europe has. That's the domestic problem that the defense chiefs are responding to. The immediate challenge is that Europe's fiscal situation has deteriorated materially. Governments have become significantly more indebted after pandemic-era spending and with unreformed social welfare systems. Populations are aging, while economic growth slows under the burden of high taxes and intrusive regulation. All of this makes it politically difficult to gin up more defense spending. European voters will have to decide if they're prepared to sacrifice some welfare benefits to guarantee national security. Their political and military leaders are doing them the favor of explaining the stakes and the risks in an effort to persuade voters to accept spending reforms. Adding to the urgency, Europe is starting to worry that President Trump may mean what he says about Europe paying for its own defense. The new Trump national security strategy has driven the point home in stark terms. Europeans hoped Mr. Trump's criticism was a bargaining ploy. But Vice President J.D. Vance and his allies in the Pentagon really believe the U.S. should play a diminished role in Europe. An unfair American caricature of Europe is that no one on the continent cares about defense. That's true of many politicians, but more than a few, and most of the most important ones, have seen the dangers clearly for some time. The challenges persuading European voters to sacrifice for the sake of defense. A lot is riding on whether this latest rhetorical push moves that political needle. Where are those manufacturing jobs? The jobs market is so-so, but tariffs are hurting domestic companies. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is finally back in the data business, and on Tuesday, it provided an update on the jobs market for October and November. Result, not great, but also not a recession signal that should cause the Federal Reserve to panic into cutting interest rates further. The economy created 64,000 net new jobs in the month, following a decline of 105,000 in October. That sounds worse than it is because the net jobs decline was all in government jobs. The private economy produced 121,000 net new jobs over the 2 months, but employment in government fell by 162,000. Most of those losses were in the federal government, and many were anticipated earlier in the year when DOGE swept through the bureaucracy. Many federal workers were paid through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, so they first hit the jobless figures in October. Our readers know the private economy is the engine of wealth creation, while most government employees are in the business of redistributing that wealth. The Biden administration went on a government hiring boom, so a reversal is what President Trump promised and won't hurt the economy. This doesn't mean the labor market is booming. The November report continues the trend from before the government shutdown that private employers are laying off workers in large numbers, but they also aren't hiring all that many. The question is why? Some blame the adoption of artificial intelligence that replaces workers, or at least caution from CEOs as they wait to see how AI affects the economy. But AI still hasn't been widely adopted, so AI can't be the dominant explanation. Our main suspect is the impact of tariffs and the uncertainty Mr. Trump's willy-nilly border tax policies have caused. The Supreme Court may soon overturn his emergency tariffs as illegal, and many CEOs want to see how that case turns out and how Mr. Trump responds. investment, and hiring may also turn up next year as the tax cut provisions of this year's tax and spending bill kick in. One big statistical reason to suspect that tariffs are hurting jobs is the trend in manufacturing. Remember when tariffs were supposed to produce a U.S. manufacturing boom? It hasn't happened. In January, BLS reported 12,755,000 workers in all manufacturing industries. The number rose by a few thousand through April, but then began to fall each month and in November hit 12,697,000. That's a net loss of 58,000 jobs, including 19,000 in the last 3 months. Further evidence comes from the industries affected most by Mr. Trump's tariffs of 50% on steel and aluminum and 25% on autos and auto parts. Employment in motor vehicles and parts fell 15,000 since January, while it remained flat in steel making and aluminum manufacturing. This doesn't count the job losses in downstream manufacturing firms that use steel and aluminum. Some renaissance. If Mr. Trump wants a manufacturing revival, he'll drop his border taxes and let his other tax policies help hiring and investment. From the opinion pages, Donald Trump's affordability failures will cost him. The economy has gone from one of the president's best issues with American voters to one of its worst. By Jason L. Riley. Every election is about affordability in one way or another, but recent cycles have given us remarkably blunt messaging on the issue from both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats are arguing over how to reduce the cost of living, not whether it's necessary. Donald Trump was reelected last year after promising to bring down prices that had risen to record levels under his predecessor. Democrat Zoran Mandani, an avowed socialist, was elected mayor of New York last month after making a similar pitch to voters. Both parties are poised to double down on affordability in next year's midterm elections. It won't be the only issue. Immigration and identity politics aren't going away, but pocketbook concerns will dominate because both sides believe they have the upper hand. Mr. Trump rarely lacks for confidence, yet when the Wall Street Journal asked him on Friday about the GOP's prospects in Congress next year, he offered an unusually cautious answer. "We'll see what happens," he responded. "We should win, but statistically, it's very tough to win." The party of the incumbent president almost always loses ground during midterm elections. There have been only 2 exceptions since World War II, Bill Clinton in 1998 and George W. Bush in 2002. And both men had job approval ratings that Mr. Trump has never come close to matching. Mr. Clinton's approval rating in 1998 was 66%, and Mr. Bush's election day job approval 4 years later was 63%. According to Real Clear Politics, Mr. Trump currently sits at 43.9%, down from a high of 50.5% in January. Mr. Trump could help the GOP cause next year and avoid a near certain third impeachment if Democrats win control of the House by improving his job approval numbers. Yet the president refuses to acknowledge why his popularity has declined. In a nutshell, the president has failed to deliver on affordability. A Fox News survey last month found that 76% of respondents were unhappy with economic conditions, up from 67% in July, and higher than the 70% who felt that way at the end of Joe Biden's presidency. Mr. Trump has spent the year alternating between blaming his predecessor for the economy's performance and insisting that the situation is better than people realize. Mr. Biden tried the same approach, and we know how that worked out. Most Americans don't like being told that they're delusional or stupid, or that their children should learn to make do with fewer dolls on Christmas. They understand that regardless of what Mr. Trump inherited, his policies are contributing to current conditions. They don't like what they see, and what they see is higher prices for food, cars, and energy. They also see a president clinging to his tariffs initiatives like a toddler clings to a security blanket. Prices for everyday staples haven't fallen during Trump's second term, the Journal reported. And some, such as for coffee and beef, have risen notably, underscoring the pressure many households continue to feel. Mortgage rates have come down, but many people still can't purchase a house. Before the pandemic, families earning $75,000 a year could afford to buy about half of all listings. As of March, those households could afford only 21% of listings, according to the National Association of Realtors. Increasing levies on imports has done more harm than good for America and its trading partners. It has raised sticker prices and the cost of operating a business. It has reduced international trade, which leads to more options for consumers at lower prices. Mr. Trump touts tariff revenue, which has increased, but he's using that revenue to bail out farmers and other Americans who have been hurt by his trade protectionism. Remember, tariffs were sold as a way to increase domestic manufacturing jobs, not revenue. Last month's jobs report showed a decline in manufacturing jobs. The Supreme Court is scrutinizing the legality of the president's tariffs, which he imposed without specific congressional authorization. Mr. Trump says the tariffs are necessary for economic and national security, but during oral arguments, most justices seemed skeptical. Mr. Trump may not appreciate it, but a ruling against his tariffs could be advantageous to Republicans next November. It would provide an opportunity for the White House to pivot away from a policy that has been politically unpopular and done nothing to advance the administration's affordability agenda. Mr. Trump could throw up his hands, announced that his tariff strategy was blocked by the judiciary despite his best efforts, and explain that his administration will find other ways to address cost of living concerns. The economy has gone from being the president's best issue with voters to being his worst. If the justices give the president a chance to change course, he should seize it. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A look back at words we redefined in 2025. Terms like affordability, socialism, and famine take on new, politically convenient meanings. By Gerard Baker. English is an especially vibrant language. The meaning of its words evolves over time. This can be organic, the product of changing habits or technology, wireless. It can reflect changing social mores, gay. Sometimes words can be repurposed by a young generation. When someone under 30 tells me someone is sick, I know not to worry about his health. But this lexical flexibility can be confusing. A common understanding of terminology is essential for everything from simple conversation to the cohesion of an entire society. English has a particular facility to be manipulated for tendentious purposes. This isn't new. In 1871, Lewis Carroll's Humpty Dumpty told Alice, "When I use a word, it means whatever I choose it to mean." In 1948, George Orwell identified newspeak as an essential component of the totalitarian toolkit. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Our polarized, relativist, post-truth era is ripe for such manipulation. As people slip deeper into their own epistemically closed worlds, politicians, public relations specialists, and journalists have become increasingly adept at adapting words to suit their own purposes. In 2025, we have had another fresh crop of words that mean one thing in one set of circumstances and something different in another. Affordability. Insufficient sensitivity to the cost of living proved costly for leaders from Marie Antoinette to Joe Biden. Last year, affordability was ignored by Democrats and amplified by Republicans. The Biden administration's insouciance, indifference towards inflation, helped elect Donald Trump, who pledged in his inaugural address to rapidly bring down cost and prices. Now that prices have continued to increase, affordability is a Democratic con job. While the word's meaning might have changed, polling suggests voters' views about the underlying reality haven't. Poor Queen Marie could have advised Mr. Trump that when you're building a new ballroom for the executive mansion, it's unwise to dismiss popular concerns about the cost of everyday staples. Socialism. This was one of those words we thought we had buried in the last century. Even the Chinese communists don't believe in it anymore. But both the word and the ideas it describes refuse to die. In 2025, America's largest city and the heart of global capitalism elected a socialist as its mayor. A Gallup poll recently found that 66% of Democrats have a favorable view of the ideology that brought the world the Gulag and the Trabant. But before Republicans get too excited about this death wish by their opponents, they should consider that socialism isn't only a word. It describes a set of political conditions that also seem to be making a comeback in a surprising place. These can include, among others, the government taking stakes in private companies, the raising of hundreds of billions in taxes on Americans, and the president directing foreign investment into America. Redistricting. This is a fine example of euphemism. It sounds like a bit of harmless bureaucratic cartography, but it has completely different meanings depending on where you live and what your politics are. If you are a Democrat and you live in Massachusetts, where 40% of the state typically votes Republican, redistricting is a virtuous and necessary act that ensures that those millions of Republicans don't get a single representative in Congress. But if you're a Democrat who lives in Republican-controlled Indiana, where roughly the same proportion of the state votes Democratic, redistricting is a wicked denial of representation to that 40% of the electorate. Pardon. It's an old meaning as an act of clemency extended by a legal authority in recognition of a convicted person's contrition and commitment to reform. In 2025, it formally became a transaction for which the consideration is financial reward or partisan support. Famine. This used to have a clear meaning. We've seen harrowing pictures of mass starvation and malnutrition in Africa caused by a widespread food deficit. But this year we saw a different sort of famine in Gaza. It was encapsulated by the famous New York Times picture of the starving boy who turned out to be seriously ill and to have a brother living in the same conditions who was remarkably well nourished. Some of us at the time suspected that famine was being abused by the Western media at the behest of Hamas. And when the ceasefire began, sure enough, evidence of famine was sparse. This is one of the many examples of how the media uses words to defame Israel and Jews. See also genocide. Climate crisis, emergency, extinction. The suite of phrases was popular among European political, cultural, and media elites even a year or so ago. In 2025, they discovered that the essential crisis it described wasn't, after all, as big as any of the ones they face, from military, industrial collapse, demographic self-annihilation, and industrial decay. Doubtless, 2026 will produce its own set of neologisms. With the World Cup on hand, I'm especially looking forward to football replacing soccer by presidential decree. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 17th, 2025 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.
If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199